Ceres had never seen anything like Earth before. Her species, the Scifi, were explorers by nature, but they had never come across a planet quite as unique as this one. Unlike the planets they had visited in the past, Earth seemed wild, untamed, and full of life. It wasn't just the planet itself that intrigued her, it was the people. There was something about humanity that called to her, something that set them apart from every other species she had encountered. And it was this strange, unexplainable pull that had led her here. As a member of the Scifi royal family, Ceres was gifted with extraordinary abilities. She was stronger, faster, and more intelligent than any human could dream of. She could read minds and manipulate objects with a thought, abilities that made her both revered and feared among her people. The Scifi were a species of peace with no need for conflict or violence. They had reached a level of advancement where emotions like anger or jealousy were foreign concepts. Life was orderly, predictable, and calm. But for Ceres, life had become boring. Her people loved her, admired her beauty and intelligence, and constantly sought her attention. Every Scifi on her home planet knew her name. She had everything anyone could ever want, except for one thing, a true connection. The Scifi lived without passion, without love. To them, emotions were a weakness, and so they did not understand why Ceres felt so empty, even when surrounded by admirers. The decision to come to Earth wasn't an easy one. The Scifi had never interacted with humans before, but Ceres had been curious about them for as long as she could remember. When the strange signal came from Earth, a signal that none of her people could decipher, it was the perfect opportunity for her to explore this mystery herself. It was a simple mission, one she was eager to complete quickly and return home to the comfort of her people. But as she prepared to leave, she felt a strange sense of excitement, an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She had a feeling that this planet, this strange, chaotic planet, held something more than just scientific interest for her. It held a chance to finally feel something real. Ceres descended to Earth in her spacecraft, landing quietly in a secluded forest far from human eyes. The craft was equipped with all the technology she would need to remain unseen, but she wasn't concerned about being detected. Her abilities allowed her to blend in with ease. She could alter her appearance, change her voice, even adjust her body temperature to match that of a human. No one would know she wasn't one of them unless she chose to reveal it. The first human she saw was a man walking through the forest near her landing site. He seemed ordinary, just another person going about his day. But something about him caught Ceres' attention. He was alone, his eyes focused on the path ahead of him, his body relaxed but alert. It was a strange combination of traits, an odd balance of peace and readiness, that Ceres found intriguing. She watched him from a distance, wondering what it was about him that made her feel something. She followed him for hours, observing him as he moved through the woods, occasionally stopping to examine the plants and animals around him. He seemed fascinated by the world, as though everything was new and exciting. His curiosity was infectious, and Ceres couldn't help but feel drawn to him. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the others she had seen. But it wasn't just his curiosity, it was his calmness, his simplicity. He didn't seem to be seeking anything, yet he seemed to find meaning in everything he did. She stayed hidden, following him through the forest, fascinated by the way he interacted with the world. He would smile at the animals, talk to himself about the weather, and even laugh at his own jokes. Ceres couldn't help but wonder why he seemed so content in his own company. In her world, companionship and social interaction were always a performance, carefully crafted and orchestrated. But here, on Earth, this man seemed to find joy in solitude. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape, Ceres realized she had been watching him for hours. She didn't want to stop, didn't want to leave. For the first time in her life, she felt a connection to another living being, and it was the strangest, most wonderful feeling. She had never experienced anything like it. The idea of just being around him, of sharing the world with him, was something she had never imagined before. But why him? Why this human who was nothing like the others in her world? She had no answers, only a feeling that something was shifting inside her, something she had never felt before. Her species was all about logic, reason, and order. Emotions were considered a weakness, something to be controlled and avoided. But Ceres couldn't ignore what was happening. She had to know more about him, to understand why he had this effect on her. With a final glance, she decided to leave, but not without a plan to return. She knew she couldn't just watch him forever from the shadows. There was something about him, something that made her heart race in a way she had never experienced. And though she didn't understand it yet, she knew that Earth, and this man, had something important to offer her. The days that followed Ceres' first sighting of Riley were filled with curiosity and confusion. She had never been so drawn to a human before. Every time she thought about him, a strange feeling surged within her. It wasn't just fascination. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race, and her thoughts become tangled. She had watched him long enough to understand that he was different from the others, but she didn't yet know why. The way he moved through the world, so calm and content, made her wonder if he had any idea of the chaos she felt inside herself. In the days that passed, Ceres found herself returning to the forest near Riley's usual path. She knew when he would be walking there, so she would arrive first, quietly waiting in the shadows to watch him. Sometimes, she'd find him sitting on a fallen log, his eyes focused on the trees around him, his mind far away in thought. At other times, he'd be talking to the birds or laughing quietly to himself at some private joke. For Ceres, it was all new. The Scifi were creatures of perfection, emotionless, logical beings who had long since rid themselves of the things that made humans human. Love, friendship, even joy. These were foreign to them. To Ceres, watching Riley live so simply, so unguarded, was like discovering an entirely new world. A world where emotions were embraced, not controlled, where people weren't afraid to express themselves. But the more she watched him, the more she realized how little she understood him. Riley wasn't like the others. He didn't seem to have the same worries, the same fears. There was no self-doubt, no hunger for approval. Ceres was used to being admired, even worshipped by the Scifi. Everyone she met thought she was perfect, but Riley didn't look at her that way. He didn't look at her at all, not in the way she expected. She had never seen anyone ignore her beauty and power before, and that intrigued her. One evening, as the sun began to set and the shadows stretched long across the ground, Ceres made a decision. She had been watching Riley for far too long. It was time for her to approach him. She knew this was dangerous. Her powers could easily overwhelm him, and revealing herself would expose her to the humans, but the pull she felt toward him was too strong to ignore. That evening, she waited for Riley to approach, hidden just behind a group of trees. As she saw him walking toward her, she stepped out into his path, her footsteps barely making a sound. When Riley noticed her, he didn't flinch or look away, as most people would have. Instead, he simply stopped and gave her a friendly smile, as though he had been expecting her all along. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ceres was surprised by how easy it felt to be near him. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was excitement, an emotion she didn't understand, but couldn't ignore. "Hello," Riley said, his voice warm and calm. Ceres couldn't help but stare at him, trying to decide how to respond. She had expected this moment to feel awkward, to be filled with tension, but instead, it felt natural. He was just a person, a human, and somehow, she felt like she could be herself around him. It was a strange sensation. "Hello," Ceres replied, her voice softer than she intended. She had to remind herself that she was in control, that she was not just any ordinary person. She was Ceres of the Scifi, someone who had lived far longer than any human could ever imagine. Riley's smile remained, but now there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. I haven't seen you around here before. Are you new to this area?" For a moment, Saris hesitated. It wasn't the question she had expected, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. She didn't have to hide who she was, at least not yet. The Scifi had taught her how to adapt, how to blend in. She could answer him as though she were just another person, another traveler passing through. "Yes," she said slowly. "I'm new." He nodded, clearly not questioning it. "Well, welcome. The forest here is beautiful, isn't it? I come here whenever I need some peace. It helps clear my mind." Saris was taken aback. Riley seemed so comfortable, so at ease with himself and his surroundings. She had seen beings from her own world struggle with the simplest of tasks. Anxiety, doubt, and insecurity were all too common. But Riley wasn't like that. There was something almost serene about him. I've never seen anything quite like this," Saris said, taking a small step toward him. She wanted to learn more, to understand him better. She wanted to know why he felt so different. "It's one of my favorite places," he replied. "There's something calming about it. Like the world here is just simpler, you know." Saris could feel the weight of his words. Simpler. She had never thought about life in such terms. Everything for her had always been about complexity, about perfection. But Riley's simplicity made her question everything. Maybe there was more to life than achieving perfection. Maybe it was about finding peace in the little things. For the next few minutes, they stood in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Saris felt strangely at home. In a way, she had been searching for something like this her entire life. She had traveled across the galaxy, seen countless civilizations, but she had never met someone like Riley. Someone who could make her feel like maybe, just maybe, her endless search for meaning could end here, with him. Finally, Riley broke the silence. "So what brings you to this part of the world?" Saris hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She could tell him the truth, that she was not human, that she had come to Earth because of a strange, growing attraction to him. But that would be dangerous. Instead, she simply smiled. "Just looking for something," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Riley smiled back. "I think we all are." The days that followed their first meeting were filled with confusion and conflict for Saris. She couldn't stop thinking about Riley. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. His calm smile, the way he spoke so naturally, the ease with which he moved through the world. She had met countless beings in her life, but none had made her feel this way. The Scifi didn't experience emotions like humans did. Love, desire, and attachment were foreign concepts to them. They had long ago evolved beyond the need for such feelings. Emotions were considered distractions, weaknesses that only cause chaos. But Riley, he made her question everything she had ever believed. Saris spent hours in the quiet of the forest, her mind racing as she thought about him. Why was she so drawn to him? What was it about Riley that made her heart race in a way she had never felt before? She knew that she couldn't afford to get attached. She had a mission, and her duty to her people came first. The Scifi needed her, and she couldn't let her feelings for a human get in the way of that. But the more time she spent on Earth, the more she realized that her duty to the Scifi felt hollow. The perfect, emotionless life she had been raised to lead didn't seem so perfect anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Saris made her way back to the forest. She had come to a decision. She had to speak with Riley. She needed to understand why she was feeling this way. She had never felt so vulnerable before, so out of control. She had always been the one in control. Her telepathic powers, her physical strength, her intelligence, everything about her had been perfect, precise. But now, here she was, on a planet full of imperfect emotional beings, unable to control her own heart. When she found Riley, he was sitting by the same fallen log, just as he had been before. His eyes were focused on the sky, his thoughts distant. Saris approached him slowly, trying to steady her breathing. She had no idea what she was going to say, only that she had to speak. Riley looked up as she approached, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Hey, Ceres," he greeted, his voice calm and inviting. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Ceres smiled, though it was more of a nervous reflex than anything else. "I couldn't stay away," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've been thinking about our last conversation." Riley raised an eyebrow, clearly interested. "Oh, about what?" She hesitated. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. How could she? She barely understood it herself. "I don't know," she began, her voice almost a whisper. I feel drawn to you. And I don't know why. I've never felt this way before. I'm not supposed to feel this way." Riley's expression softened as he looked at her. He didn't seem surprised, but there was a hint of understanding in his eyes. "You don't have to explain it to me, Ceres," he said gently. "I get it. Sometimes we feel things that don't make sense, but that doesn't mean they're wrong." Ceres blinked, taken aback by his response. You understand." Riley nodded. "I think I do. I mean, I've felt it too. I've felt a connection with you since the moment we met. It's hard to explain, but I can't deny it. And I don't want to." Ceres felt a weight lift off her chest. For the first time someone like Riley, wasn't trying to explain away her feelings. He wasn't telling her to suppress them or push them aside. He was accepting her for who she was, even though she didn't fully understand herself. "But why?" she asked softly. "Why me? I'm not like you. I'm not even human. You could have anyone. You could have anyone who's real. Someone who isn't so different." Riley shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're real, Ceres, in ways that matter more than what we look like on the outside. You've shown me a side of the world that I never knew existed. You've made me see that there's more to life than just what we can see or touch. There's something deeper, something worth exploring. And I want to explore that with you." Ceres was silent for a moment, letting his words settle in her mind. She had always seen herself as different, special in a way that no one could understand. But Riley, with his simple, human perspective, made her see that being different didn't mean she was alone. He saw her as someone worth loving, someone worth understanding. And that thought filled her with a warmth she had never known. "I don't know what this means," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I don't want to leave. I don't want to go back to my people. I don't want to be perfect anymore. I want to be human." Riley reached out, his hand brushing hers gently. "You don't have to be perfect, Ceres. You just have to be you." For the first time, Ceres felt like she could breathe freely. She didn't have to hide who she was. She didn't have to suppress her feelings. There was no need to control everything. Riley had shown her that love, connection, and understanding weren't about perfection. They were about accepting each other, flaws and all. But even as she allowed herself to feel this new, unfamiliar sense of peace, Ceres knew that her decision wouldn't come without consequences. Her people, the Scifi, would never understand. They would never accept her feelings for a human, and that thought made her heart ache with fear. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she didn't care. She had found something real, something worth fighting for, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. The days after Ceres' confession to Riley were filled with both joy and unease. She had never experienced anything like the feeling of being around him. Every moment spent together felt like an adventure, even in the simplest of ways. Riley was kind and patient, and he seemed to understand her better than anyone ever had. It was as if he could see the parts of her that she had always hidden, and somehow that made her feel less alone. For the first time in her life, she wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. Yet, despite the growing connection between them, Ceres couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at her. She had come to Earth for a reason. Her mission was to observe humanity, to understand them, and to report back to the Scifi. Her people needed this information. The Scifi were not interested in emotional connections or relationships, and she had known that from the start. They valued logic, order, and control. But now, here she was, caught in something she hadn't expected, something she didn't know how to control. What would happen if the Scifi found out? How would they react to her feelings for a human? They would see it as a betrayal, an emotional weakness that could jeopardize everything she had worked for. Cirrus didn't want to think about the consequences, but she couldn't help it. The thoughts haunted her, casting a shadow over the joy she felt in Riley's presence. One afternoon, as they sat by the lake near the forest, Cirrus felt a familiar heaviness in her chest. Riley was skipping stones across the water, his eyes focused on the ripples they made. She watched him for a moment, her heart fluttering in a way that made her want to stay there forever, to forget about her mission and just live in the moment. But the weight of her responsibility was never far behind. It kept pulling at her, reminding her that she had to return to her people, that she couldn't stay on Earth forever. Riley glanced at her, noticing the distant look in her eyes. "You're quiet today," he remarked, his voice gentle. "Is something on your mind?" Cirrus hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to lie to him, but the truth was too complicated. She had always been taught to keep her emotions in check, to suppress any feelings that might interfere with her purpose. But now, Riley was making it harder to keep everything inside. "I'm just thinking," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "About everything. About what I'm supposed to do." Riley set down the stone in his hand and turned to face her, his expression concerned. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Cirrus took a deep breath, trying to calm the swirling thoughts in her mind. "I didn't come here to feel like this. I came here to observe, to learn about your world. But now, I feel like I'm losing control. I didn't expect to care about someone like you. It's not logical." Riley looked at her for a long moment, his gaze serious. "Sometimes we don't choose what we feel. Emotions don't always make sense, but they're part of being human. They're what make life worth living, even when they're confusing or difficult. You don't have to understand it all. Just feel it. Let yourself feel." His words struck her deeply. She had never thought of emotions that way before. To her, they had always been something to avoid, something to keep at bay. But Riley was showing her a different perspective, a way of accepting feelings without fear. "I don't know if I can," Cirrus admitted quietly. "I spent so long pushing emotions aside, pretending they don't matter. But now, everything feels so real. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to let go of everything I've been taught." Riley's smile softened as he reached out to gently touch her hand. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here, Cirrus. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to trust yourself." For a moment, Cirrus closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. It was as if the world had slowed down, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to control everything. She didn't need to have all the answers. Riley had given her permission to just be, to feel, and for the first time, she realized how freeing that could be. But even as she let herself feel the comfort of his touch, the nagging doubt returned. The Scifi would never accept this. They wouldn't understand why she had chosen to stay on Earth, to live among humans and experience emotions like love. The fear of their judgment hung over her, making it difficult to fully embrace what was happening between her and Riley. "What if I'm wrong?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm making a mistake?" Riley squeezed her hand gently. "There's no such thing as the right or wrong way to feel, Cirrus. Emotions are just part of being alive. What matters is what you choose to do with them." Cirrus looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, but there was none. All she saw was trust, understanding, and care. It was enough to make her heart swell with something unfamiliar, but beautiful. "I wish I could be more like you," Cirrus admitted, her voice soft with longing. "You make it look so easy. You just feel." Riley smiled at her, a look of understanding in his eyes. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Feeling, living, it's what makes us human. Cirrus leaned back, gazing out at the water. She had a lot to think about, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. Riley's words had given her a new way of thinking about emotions, about life. She didn't have to suppress her feelings anymore. She didn't have to hide from what was real. Maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in this world after all. But the question still lingered in her mind. What would she do when the time came to leave? Would she be able to walk away from Riley? Could she leave Earth behind and return to the life she had known, knowing that she had experienced something she could never forget? The future was uncertain, and it scared her. But for now, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of Riley's hand in hers, knowing that she was not alone. The days continued to pass, and the conflict within Cirrus only grew stronger. She had come to Earth with a purpose, to learn about humanity, to observe, and to report back to the Scifi. But with every passing moment, she felt herself drifting further from that mission. Every time she saw Riley, every time they talked, she felt more and more attached to him. The connection between them was undeniable, and it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Cirrus spent more and more time with Riley, allowing herself to feel the emotion she had once kept buried deep inside. She felt joy when they laughed together, comfort when they sat in silence, and warmth in the simple touch of his hand. Riley had shown her a side of life she had never known, a life where emotions were not weaknesses but strengths. And with him, she felt like she could finally be herself. But no matter how much she wanted to stay in this moment, she knew that eventually she would have to make a choice. She couldn't continue to live in this world of contradictions. She couldn't stay with Riley forever, not when her people needed her. The Scifi would never understand why she had allowed herself to care for a human. They would see it as a mistake, a flaw that could put their mission in jeopardy. And that thought filled her with fear. One evening, after a long day spent exploring the forest with Riley, Cirrus found herself standing at the edge of the lake, staring out at the setting sun. The colors of the sky reflected in the water, creating a peaceful scene that only made her internal struggle harder. She could feel Riley standing behind her, watching her silently. She hadn't spoken much since they left the forest, her mind consumed by the choice that lay ahead. The weight of it was suffocating. "Cirrus," Riley's voice broke through her thoughts, soft and gentle. "Are you okay?" She turned to face him, her heart heavy. "I don't know, Riley," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do." Riley stepped closer, his presence a calming force. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Cirrus looked at him, her heart aching. She had never met anyone who understood her like Riley did. He was kind, patient, and selfless. He didn't pressure her to make a decision. He just let her be. And for the first time, she felt like someone truly cared for her, not for her strength, her power, or her beauty, but for who she really was. "I've never had to make a choice like this before," Cirrus said, her voice trembling. "I've always known what I was supposed to do. I've always known my place. But now I don't know anymore." Riley gave her a small, reassuring smile. Sometimes life isn't about knowing exactly what to do. Sometimes it's about choosing what feels right, even if it's hard. Cirrus closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been taught that emotions were distractions, that logic and duty were the only things that mattered. But Riley had shown her that there was more to life than following a set path. There was room for choice, for love, for uncertainty. She could choose her own future, and that scared her more than anything. "I'm afraid, Riley," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm afraid of making the wrong choice. I'm afraid that if I choose you, I'll be turning my back on everything I've ever known, on my people, on my mission." Riley took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to choose between me and your mission," he said gently. "What you choose is up to you. But you don't have to do it alone. Whatever path you take, I'll be there for you." Cirrus felt a surge of emotion, and for a moment, she didn't know how to process it. Her heart was torn between two worlds, between the life she had always known and the life she was beginning to imagine with Riley. She wanted to stay with him, to build a future together, but she couldn't forget the duty she had to her people. She had a responsibility, a role to play in the future of the Scifi. But then, as she looked at Riley, she realized something important. He wasn't asking her to choose between him and her people. He wasn't trying to pull her away from everything she had known. He was simply offering her a chance at something new, something real. And maybe that was enough. "I don't know what the future holds," Cirrus said quietly, "but I know that I can't ignore what I feel. I can't ignore you. I can't ignore this." Riley's eyes softened, and he reached out to gently take her hand. "You don't have to. Whatever you decide, I'm here, and I'll be here when you're ready." Cirrus looked at their joined hands, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so much of her life trying to control everything, trying to keep her emotions in check, trying to follow the path that was laid out for her. But now she realized there was no easy answer. There was no perfect solution. There was only what felt right in the moment. And right now, in this moment, she knew that being with Riley was what felt right. For the first time, she didn't have to hide her feelings. She didn't have to suppress her heart. She could just be herself. The future was uncertain, and the choice ahead of her was still difficult. But Cirrus knew one thing for sure. She couldn't turn her back on what she had found with Riley. She had to choose her own path, even if it meant stepping away from the only life she had ever known. And in that moment, with Riley standing beside her, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. Whatever the future held, she would face it with him by her side. The decision that Cirrus had been avoiding for so long could no longer be ignored. The weight of it pressed down on her every day. She had spent weeks with Riley, learning about emotions, about love, and about herself. But as much as she wanted to stay, as much as she wanted to build a future with him, the reality of her situation still loomed over her. The Scifi had been patient, but they would not wait forever. The mission she had been sent on was still far from complete, and the longer she stayed on Earth, the more difficult it would be to return. Her people had no tolerance for weakness, and emotional attachment would be seen as a betrayal. It wasn't just about her. It was about the safety and future of the Scifi as a whole. If she failed to report back with the information they needed, it could jeopardize everything. Cirrus stood on the edge of the lake, her fingers gently skimming the surface of the water. The sun had set, leaving the sky in deep shades of purple and orange. The tranquility of the scene only seemed to make her feelings more complicated. She could hear the soft rustle of leaves behind her, the familiar sound of Riley approaching. But today, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had reached a crossroads, and she couldn't keep going in two directions. "Cirrus," Riley called softly, his voice filled with concern. "I've been looking for you. Are you okay?" She turned to face him, her heart heavy with the burden of the decision she knew she had to make. "I don't know, Riley," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm not sure what's right anymore." Riley stepped closer, his eyes full of understanding. "You've been carrying this weight for too long. I can see it in your eyes. You don't have to make this decision alone." Cirrus closed her eyes, feeling the conflict tear at her from within. She had never felt so lost. There were so many things she cared about now, so many things that made her question everything she had believed. Riley was one of those things. She cared for him deeply, and the thought of leaving him hurt in ways she hadn't expected. But her mission, her duty to the Scifi, still held a powerful grip on her heart. "I can't stay, Riley," she said, her voice shaking with the weight of her words. "I have to go back to my people. I have to finish my mission." Riley's face softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. He nodded, understanding more than she expected. "I know. I knew this day was coming. I I hoped it wouldn't. Cirrus felt tears sting her eyes, but she forced them back. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to choose between you and my people. But I don't know if I can stay. I don't know if I can leave everything behind. Riley was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady, but filled with emotion. I understand, Cirrus. I understand more than you know. But I don't want you to go because you feel like you have to. I want you to make this choice because it's what you truly want. If you want to stay with me, I'll be here. But if you have to go, I'll understand. Cirrus felt her chest tighten at his words. She had never expected Riley to make things easier for her. He had always been patient, always ready to listen. But now he was asking her to make a choice she wasn't sure she was ready to make. He had always supported her, but now, it felt like he was giving her the freedom to choose her own path, even if that meant walking away from him. I'm scared, Riley, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if I leave, I'll never be able to come back. I'm scared that if I choose you, I'll lose everything I've ever known. Riley reached out, taking her hand in his. Cirrus, no matter what happens, you're not alone. I will be here for you, no matter where you go. You don't have to be afraid of losing me, because I'll never truly be gone. The warmth of his hand in hers was a comfort, but it also made the decision harder. Cirrus had never imagined that her life would come to this moment. She had always been so sure of herself, so certain of her duty. But now, in the face of Riley's love and the future she had begun to see with him, the path ahead was uncertain, and that scared her more than anything. She looked at Riley, her heart aching. I don't know what to do, Riley. I don't know if I can be what you need. Riley smiled, but it was a sad smile. You don't have to be anything but yourself, Cirrus. You're already enough. You've already shown me a world I never could have imagined. And whatever happens, I'll always be grateful for that. Cirrus felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. I don't want to hurt you. You're not hurting me, Riley said softly. You're just being true to yourself, and that's all I ever wanted for you. The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Cirrus felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her, but at the same time, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Riley's acceptance, his understanding, made her realize that no matter what decision she made, it would be hers to own. And she didn't have to face it alone. I'll never forget you, Riley, Cirrus whispered, her voice filled with emotion. No matter what happens, I'll always remember this. I'll never forget you either, Riley replied, his voice thick with emotion. You'll always have a place in my heart. As Cirrus turned to face the horizon, her heart felt torn in two. The future was still uncertain, and the path ahead wasn't clear. But one thing was certain. She had made an impact on this world, on Riley's heart, and on her own. And no matter where she went, she would carry that with her. The morning after the difficult conversation with Riley, Cirrus woke up to the quiet sounds of the forest. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the landscape. The world seemed peaceful, but Cirrus knew that today would be anything but peaceful. She had made her decision, and now it was time to face the consequences. Riley had given her the space she needed, but Cirrus couldn't avoid him forever. The choice she had to make wasn't just about her mission or her feelings for him. It was about who she was and what she wanted her future to look like. She could no longer live in the space between two worlds. She had to choose one. After a long time of thinking, Cirrus had come to a conclusion. She couldn't leave Earth, not yet. The Scifi would always be a part of her, but so would Riley, and the connection they shared couldn't be ignored. She had come to Earth to learn about humans, to understand their emotions, but what she hadn't realized was that she needed to learn about herself as well. And in the process, she had found something she wasn't willing to give up. Cirrus stood near the lake, her thoughts focused as she stared at the water. Her mind was clear now, her heart certain. She had chosen Riley, Not because it was easy, but because it felt right. She wasn't abandoning her mission, but she was choosing a new path, a path where love and connection were just as important as duty. When Riley appeared, walking towards her with a hesitant smile, Cirrus could see the worry in his eyes. He had been waiting for her decision, and now that it was time to speak, she felt the weight of his gaze. "Riley," Cirrus began, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "I've made my choice." Riley's eyes widened slightly, and he took a step closer. "What did you decide?" Cirrus took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her chest loosen. She had thought about this moment for days, but now that it was here, everything felt clear. "I can't leave. Not yet. I want to stay with you, Riley. I want to see where this can go." Riley's face softened, his expression filled with relief and happiness. "You mean it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cirrus nodded, her heart racing. "I do. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I can't imagine it without you in it. I don't want to choose between you and my people. I don't want to choose between love and duty. But I do know this. I'm choosing you. For now." Riley smiled, a genuine smile that made Cirrus feel like everything would be okay. He reached out and gently took her hand in his. "I'll be here, Cirrus. Whatever happens, I'll be right here." For a moment, they stood together, their hands entwined, watching the sunrise in silence. There was so much uncertainty about the future, but Cirrus didn't mind. She had chosen her path, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with her decision. She had chosen to live in the moment, to embrace the love she felt, and to trust that whatever happened next would unfold in its own time. "I don't know if I'm making the right choice," Cirrus admitted softly, "but I'm ready to find out." "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Riley said, his voice full of warmth. "The right choice is the one that feels true to you, and that's what matters." Cirrus smiled, her heart lightening at his words. "Thank you, Riley. I'm so glad you're here with me." "I'll always be here," he promised, his eyes never leaving hers, no matter what. As they stood together, the world around them seemed to fall away. The weight of Cirrus's decision had lifted, and all that was left was the feeling of peace that came with it. She had chosen to live in the moment, to experience the world through the eyes of someone who cared, and for the first time, she felt truly free. The journey ahead would not be easy. She would still have to face her mission and the expectations of her people. But for now, Cirrus was content. She was no longer torn between two worlds. She had found a way to balance both, to create a life that was uniquely her own. As the days passed, Cirrus and Riley grew closer. Their bond deepened with each conversation, each shared experience, and each quiet moment spent together. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together. And as Cirrus looked at Riley, she realized that sometimes the greatest adventure wasn't about what you were meant to do. It was about finding someone to share it with. For Cirrus, that someone was Riley. No matter where life took them, she knew they would be ready for whatever came next. The end of one chapter was only the beginning of another. And as the stars filled the sky above, Cirrus knew that her story was just beginning.